Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Israel Brief, brought to you by Lay of the Land. I'm Rolene Marks, your host, bringing you the top stories from Israel and surrounds every Monday to Thursday. And just a reminder that you can view the Israel Brief on our Facebook page at Lottel's site or on YouTube. Our channel is called the Israel Brief. And why don't you join our growing community by clicking on the red subscribe button? So without further ado, let's get into today's top stories. And it is a very, very solemn and somber day in Israel today. It is Yom HaShoah, the day that we commemorate victims and survivors of the Holocaust. In fact, the day is called Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Memorial Day. And it is a day that coincides with the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Now, the day started from sunset yesterday evening with a very, very solemn ceremony at Yad Vashem. This is the National Memorial and Museum to victims and the telling of the history and the story of the Holocaust. And very, very moving speeches given by President Rivlin, who spoke about survivors and also alluded to the experience of survivors, many of whom we've lost during this global pandemic. President Netanyahu also spoke, and his speech took on a more political tone. He also alluded to the vaccination program. He spoke about the CEO of Pfizer, whose family history is that of having to experience and lose family members during the Holocaust. But he also spoke about current events, and he alluded to Israel's upcoming investigations by the International Criminal Court and a potential deal with Iran by the United States, and reiterated that no matter what, Israel, despite our closest friendships, will always rely on itself to defend itself. But of course, the most moving part of the ceremony was the lighting of torches by 6 Holocaust survivors, each of who told their absolutely heart-wrenching and harrowing stories, while accompanied by a family member to light the memorial torches. And then earlier today at 10 o'clock, the entire country, no matter where you are, whether you are in your office, your home, on the beach, in the roads, driving your car, on the bus, the entire country came to an absolute standstill as the war siren or the memorial siren rang out through the country. Now, it's different to the sirens that we talk about when there are rocket attacks. The siren that goes for Yom HaShoah, and we'll do so next week for Yom HaZikaron, where we remember our fallen soldiers, is a long 2-minute drone, a very, very piercing drone. You can almost hear the crying of all of us through that sound. And throughout the day has been dedicated to hearing the last of the survivors tell their stories, and of course making sure that education programs are dedicated to education about the Holocaust and prevention of future genocides. With all of this, and especially as we have endured a global pandemic this year, which have seen us lose many survivors around the world. In fact, I was reading a statistic that South Africa only has 30 survivors left. So it has been reminded that we are the generation that have to take responsibility for perpetuating the memory and for making sure that we don't forget. And we can do this by making sure that we educate future generations about the Holocaust and how it started with words of hate that eventually culminated in mass extermination. The sun will set just hours from now, but even though we have 24 or 26 hours dedicated to Holocaust Memorial, let's make sure that every day we remember the victims. In other news, the Biden administration has quietly this month restored aid to the Palestinians, including the United Nations agency UNRWA. UNRWA is mandated with looking after refugees. In fact, they have a special mandate that is specific to Palestinian refugees. This has come under a lot of criticism in the past by many saying that Palestinian refugees, who on the one hand aren't essentially refugees anymore, but if they still are considered so, can be absorbed by the High Commission on Refugees. But why, for other reasons, is this controversial? UNRWA has faced a lot of criticism in the past for allowing not only its infrastructure in Gaza to be used as weapon storage depots or to be used as human shields during a time of conflagration, but also for perpetuating the cycle of hate by having materials in their educational books that promote violence and incite hatred. And in a very impassioned press release released by Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, who's also our ambassador to the United States, Gilad Erdan, who criticized this and said to the United States it is extremely irresponsible to restore aid to an organization without any kind of consequences, without any kind of criteria or checks and balances, and to make sure that they toe the line when it comes to the promotion of peace. He criticized the restoring of aid to UNRWA because of the perpetuation of hate incitement. Along with the quiet restoring of aid to the Palestinians, the Biden administration has also endorsed a two-state solution. Now, this is not a departure from the previous Trump administration, who also endorsed a two-state solution, but just had a different strategy. And while this is going on, we do have to take note that President Biden has yet to call the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who has subsequently snubbed any overtures towards him by Secretary of State Blinken by not taking his calls. And our final story of the day takes us back to the pandemic, but this time it's good news for Israelis, as the coronavirus cabinet voted earlier to lift more restrictions. So what this means is that more people will be allowed to gather in crowds. This is very good news, especially as the national holidays are continuing next week with Yom HaZikaron and then Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day. Permission has also been given to bereaved families to visit the grave of their loved ones who have fallen, and also victims of terror next week for Remembrance Day. Last year, the government took a lot of criticism for not allowing families to do so, but hopefully this year families will be able to visit their fallen. Also, Yom HaAtzmaut, one of my favorite pastimes is watching the flyover, and that has been restored this year, much to a lot of our excitement. And if you're planning on visiting your relatives in Israel and you have been vaccinated or you have been recovered, you are now allowed to do so. However, I must caution, please to check your local Israeli embassy or consulate to see what the criteria is. So those are your top stories for today. Don't forget to check out our website at www.layoftheland.online. I know many of you have been wanting to tour Yad Vashem. You can do a virtual tour by reading Dave Kaplan's article about Yad Vashem. It's up on our website. It's also up on our Facebook page. While you're there, give us a like or a follow, share our content. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at layoftheland5. And there is that channel on YouTube at The Israel Brief. So all that remains is for me to wish you a wonderful and peaceful weekend. Shabbat Shalom from all of us here at The Israel Brief and Lay of the Land. I'm Rolene Marks, and you and I have a date on Monday.